Welcome back to Chapter 5, Chemical Changes, Section 5.2, Displacement Reactions. By the end of this tutorial, you will be able to explain how to identify in a given reaction, symbol equation or half equation, which species are oxidized and which are reduced in terms of electron transfer. Now we are going to examine oxidation and reduction. In the previous section, you have seen that oxidation and reduction was defined as the chemical addition of oxygen, where oxidation is the addition of oxygen, however, reduction was the removal of oxygen. However, a wider definition involves the transfer of electrons rather than oxygen atoms. And they have mentioned that oxidation is the loss of electrons, however, reduction is the gain of electrons. If we're gonna speak about oxidation and reduction in terms of electrons, oxidation will be the loss of electrons actually, and reduction is the gain of electrons. You can apply these definitions to displacement reactions in solution. So, an example is the displacement of copper 2 ions by iron, and this reaction is used in industry to extract copper metal from copper sulfate solution. How they do so? They mix iron with copper sulfate. Here the iron will displace the copper in the copper sulfate and it will extract the copper. It will allow us to extract the copper. The iron which is added here is actually a very cheap type of iron, and it is a cheap scrap iron. And the ionic equation for this reaction is Fe, which is the iron as a solid state, plus copper ions, which is Cu2 plus. It will produce iron ions, which are Fe2 plus Cu, which is the copper metal that we need to extract. Also, you can use half equations to show what happens to each reactant. For example, the iron actually, it loses electrons, it gives electrons, so the iron is oxidized, it does oxidation. The iron was first as a solid. After that, when it reacts with copper sulfate, it releases Fe2 plus ions plus 2 electrons. It releases 2 electrons in the solution. This is the oxidation half equation. What about these 2 electrons that the iron released? The copper ions will take these 2 electrons, will gain these 2 electrons and become the copper metal. This is the reduction. The iron atoms, we said they lose 2 electrons to form iron 2 ions. This is oxidation, the loss of electrons. And the iron atoms has been oxidized. The 2 electrons from the iron are gained by the copper 2 ions as they form copper atoms, as we have mentioned here, which is in the reduction equation reaction. This is reduction, this reaction is reduction, and because there was gain of electrons, so the copper ions now have been reduced. This is why these displacement reactions are also known as redox reactions, which means they include a reduction equation and an oxidation equation.